Welcome everyone. My name is Shelley Tannenbaum and I'm from Quaker Earthcare Witness. I'm going to give us another minute or so as I see people are joining, and then I'll begin an introduction. I want to welcome you all to the second of these webinars that Friends World Committee for Consultation has been coordinating with Quaker Earthcare Witness and a couple of other organizations. We're really excited about bringing together friends from across the branches. We had a little confusion this morning because of the timing across international borders, and particularly we've identified the problem as the United States. That's not unusual, who has this confusing standard time, daylight time switch between summer and other months. And we think it caught us up, and we apologize for that confusion. What we're going to do as a result is we're going to start now when some of you figured out was the London starting time. I didn't figure this out until about 40 minutes ago. So here we are. But we're going to go on for the full 2 hours with as many people who can continue to stay with us for that. And all of this will be recorded and will be made available to anyone who missed any parts of it. Again, I want to introduce myself. I'm Shelley Tannenbaum. I'm the General Secretary of Quaker Earthcare Witness, and we're a network of friends from across the branches, a network of friends from primarily in North America, but we feel an outreach to the rest of the world in terms of the stories we tell about what friends are doing in the world. Today's seminar will bring together 4 people who are doing amazing work in the world. We're going to start with Emily Wirzba from Friends Committee on National Legislation in the United States. We're hoping that Emma Condori Mamani will join us from Bolivia. We'll have her speak whenever she's available. We have Beverly Ward from Southeastern yearly meeting. She's the field secretary for that yearly meeting, and she's the only field secretary for Earthcare that we know of. And Kallan Benson, a friend from Annapolis, Maryland, who's a leader with the Youth Climate Strikes. We're going to be continuing these webinars into the future, so you are all invited to suggest to us presenters that you think would be of interest to a setting like this. And we're particularly interested in talking to folks who are outside of North America. So please send us your suggestions. As I said, this will be recorded, and we hope to make that available to you within a month. It takes a little bit of time because we add captioning to the video before we distribute it. And I also want to introduce the 3 of us who are coordinating this webinar. And the first is Faith Biddle from the Friends World Committee for Consultation World Office. She's waving her hand. And I also want to introduce Cherise Bach, who's the co-clerk of Sierra Cascades yearly meeting, and she's an educator in the Creation Care program at George Fox Seminary. Cherise? And you're all welcome to send any questions you have for the presenters to Cherise directly. If they go to everyone, that's fine, she'll get them anyway, but it'll be a little less confusing if you direct your questions to Cherise, and she'll collect them and coordinate them. And after the speakers have had a chance to present, we'll present the questions to them. We've asked each of our presenters to talk about the following queries that I'll read, and then they'll repeat them as they're speaking them too. First is to give you a brief introduction as to who they are and how they're connected with friends. Second is to talk about what they're currently working on. Third is, why are you led to do this work? And lastly, what do you hope to see happen in the next year? Each of the panelists will talk for about 10 minutes. We'll keep track of time and signal them when it's close to the 10 minutes. And after that, we'll follow that with questions. We might vary this format a bit. I don't think Emma's joined us yet, so we'll do what we can with the slightly confusing time that we're in. But I want to start with a few moments of worship, and then Emily Wirzba will break the silence when she's ready and begin her presentation. Thank you all again for joining us. It's wonderful to see so many different faces here.
All right, thank you, friends. I'm really excited to be here and speak to everyone this morning or evening, wherever you may be. So my name is Emily Wirzba, and I am the Legislative Manager for Sustainable Energy and the Environment at the Friends Committee on National Legislation, FCNL, which is located in Washington, D.C. So FCNL was founded in 1943 by members of the Religious Society of Friends. And we have a team of lobbyists that work on a variety of domestic and foreign policy issues. We also work very closely with a grassroots network of with tens of thousands of people to help them around the country learn about the issues of the day and learn how to advocate to their own members of Congress. So the policy priorities that we work on our general committee of Quakers and also meetings from around the country that send us their policy priorities. And through a consensus process, we come up with our legislative priorities for each Congress. We are a nonpartisan organization that seek to bring in Quaker values of integrity and simplicity, peace, stewardship to Congress. And we work to build relationships across political divides to help advance these policies in Congress. So I work very closely with friends all around the country on a daily basis as I seek to both train and equip our network, but also to represent them to Congress. So the question, what am I currently working on? I think in order to fully answer that, I need to give a little bit of context for what the political situation was like in the US when I first began working at FCNL a little bit over 6 years ago. So when I arrived, our program's primary goal was to foster the political will in Congress to actually pass bipartisan legislation to address climate change. And when we were reading the latest science reports from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the National Climate Assessment here in the US, it became very clear kind of the extent of international action that was needed to address climate change. And as many of you all know, the United States was the key blocker to ambitious international action. We knew that the rest of the world was doing a lot of really important work, but the US was really holding progress back. And when we looked at why specifically the US wasn't acting, we came down to the partisanship and polarization of climate change in US Congress. At the time when I first began in 2013, we had an executive branch that was taking action on climate change, but a Congress that was not. And so when I started, it was really such a partisan issue. And I give that context because our current moment is radically different than what it was 6 years ago. I know there's a long ways to go still, but our goal of fostering bipartisan action on climate change is really, it's working. We went from 0 Republicans in Congress publicly talking about climate change at all, to now you have hearings led by Republicans and Democrats in both the Senate and the House of our Congress talking about climate change and solutions. And while there are still climate deniers in Congress, they're much harder to find. And you have people from both sides willing to engage in a debate about solutions. And now it's fair to argue that the solutions being put forward by particular members of Congress aren't enough, or they're not just policies, but to us, it's such a better starting point to be able to have the conversation about meaningful solutions rather than debating the problem. So what I'm working on right now is it's kind of a shift from what it's been for many years, because we're in this new political moment where I think we've seen such incredible pressure from the grassroots and from youth climate activists. You've seen impacts devastating communities around the world. There's this building pressure and momentum to do something. Yet we're also in this weird time where, given our current presidential administration, it's not likely that we will see comprehensive climate action coming from the US, from the legislative branch in the next year and a half. Most people think the earliest possibility for major action will be 2021. So what do we do in between? We can't just do nothing, right? This is an urgent problem, we can't wait. So a lot of what FCNL's work has been right now is figuring out how do we lay a solid foundation so that Congress can be as prepared as possible to pass comprehensive policy as soon as they get the next opportunity where we have the political will to do so. So we're still spending a lot of time educating members of Congress about policy proposals and really trying to elevate equity concerns as we do so in order to get members of Congress prepared to vote yes eventually. So one of the main policies that's been gaining momentum has been carbon tax, carbon pricing, where there are now 7 different carbon tax bills in Congress, 4 of which have bipartisan support. So we take the position that a carbon tax can be one tool of many that Congress should consider, that it can't alone solve the problem, but that it is a really important piece that will help make other policies easier to implement. And as we've been educating members about the importance of carbon pricing, we've been primarily focusing on ensuring that policies are designed to protect a variety of vulnerable communities. So we're specifically lifting up communities of color, low-income communities, immigrant communities, those in rural places, maybe those not living in the wage economy, and groups like that, thinking about if we want to make it more expensive to use fossil fuels, what will that impact be on those more vulnerable people? And then we're doing a lot of work to try to get members of Congress prepared to talk about that and to take a stance. And we're also looking to take advantage of kind of shorter windows of opportunity as they come up in the next year in Congress. So working on tax credits to make it cheaper for technologies such as energy storage or offshore wind to come onto the market. So we're playing both a short-term game and a longer-term game as we do this work in Congress. And we're focused on training our constituents around the country to have the conversations with their members now to say, we care about climate change. This is a top priority for us. What are the solutions that you're putting forward? So that's a bit about what our work is looking like in this current moment. And to answer the question, why am I led to do this work specifically? So there are a few answers that I can give to this question. So one, the reason that I focus on lobbying specifically and engaging in structural change at the federal level is that currently the news about climate change is so devastating. It's really hard and can be really depressing work. And for me, the act of working towards structural change, even if I don't see an immediate result all the time, it helps me feel like I'm moving the needle. And I think the unique Quaker approach to finding common ground allows me to stay positive because rather than focusing on the denialism, I'm able to figure out maybe I can't get a member of Congress to agree 100% on this policy, but we can talk about our shared love for a particular coastal region, or we can talk about our shared concern for the future of our children and grandchildren. So to me, it's a hopeful frame. I also will say, I think I'm led to do this work because I've seen it work as democracy in action. We had a group of Quaker middle school students from Tandem Friends School from Virginia a few weeks ago come in, and FCNL staff trained them how to lobby and make their voices heard. And they met with the staff for their Republican member of Congress. And he agreed to take climate action and join the Climate Solutions Caucus, which is a group of legislators we work with, just based off of their visit. So that was really empowering. And so to me, this type of work, it gives me hope to continue on, even though I know there's a lot more that needs to be done. And I know that lobbying is just one piece of a variety of tactics needed to really address this problem. So finally, in my final few seconds, I want to just share that what I hope to see in this next year, I really want people to prioritize climate change here in the US when they go to the polls next November, to really vote for candidates that, that will make this an urgent issue. And I hope that everyone will speak with their members of Congress or with their local and state elected officials and really engage in that democratic process and talk to your representatives and government officials about why this has to be a priority and the types of solutions that you want them to promote. So with that, I will end, and really looking forward to the discussion and questions.
Thank you so much, Emily, and thank you for the good work that you and the rest of FCNL are doing in Washington. I'd like to invite Beverly to join us next and to share with us her answers to the questions. First, to introduce herself, and then what she's currently working on. Why are you doing this work, and what do you hope to see happen in the next year? So Beverly, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. I'm Beverly Ward, and I am the field secretary for Earthcare for Southeastern Yearly Meeting. Southeastern Yearly Meeting includes meeting and worship groups in Florida, South Carolina, coastal South Carolina, and southern Georgia. We also have a worship group in Havana and a meeting in Managua. So I haven't made it to all the meetings and worship groups, which is part of my charge as the field secretary, but I'm getting there. That charge comes out of the position that came out of the yearly meeting, and it really grew from a minute that the yearly meeting framed around Earthcare. And the youth said to the yearly meeting, if you're serious about this, then we should have someone working on it. And the position grew from there. This year, I'm celebrating my 3rd year as field secretary for Earthcare. Beyond the charge to work with meetings and worship groups in our yearly meeting, I work with the wider Quaker world, including Emily and Shelley. I have a pen pal relationship with FWCC around what we're doing. And just we have some connections with FUM. So it's, again, the wider Quaker world, AFSC. I'm a member of the corporation. I'm also working with the Quaker United Nations office. Basically, what I do is try to bring local issues from the worship groups and yearly meetings up to the wider Quaker world and other environmental groups, and also bring information back down to the local communities. And this interrelationship of how we are all connected around Care for the Earth, and specifically here in Florida and throughout our yearly meeting, issues around climate disruption, and how can we, in our Quaker way, respond to the urgency that this presents for us. I am particularly struck by a number of the impacts that are happening in Florida, and I'll talk in a minute about sunny day flooding, which is one of the biggest things that we're facing right now. But there are other impacts that we're concerned about. Particularly, Florida is being impacted by larger storms in addition to sea level rise. We're most recently, Hurricane Nestor impacted an area of Florida that was hit by Hurricane Michael. And people are in this continual recovery mode that is becoming the new normal. And what does that mean in terms of displacement and also being a receiving community? With we receive people from the islands when they're hit, and then we're also impacted. So it's a double a double impact, and the concerns that we have around this. What does it mean as a Quaker to also, you know, are we going to be part of climate gentrification, and how will we participate in that? Will we be displacing other people as they are impacted by storm? One of the most striking things I saw recently, I work also with prisoner visitation and support and the Alternatives to Violence Project. And I was attending a prison visitation and support workshop in Canton, Mississippi, where we visited a prison unit of prisoners that had been displaced from Marianna, Florida, from Hurricane Michael. So this is these are the impacts that we're seeing that sometimes fall off people's radar. And so I see my position as helping people to identify how they are being impacted by climate disruption locally, and then figuring out ways that I can partner with them and partner with others to address these the impacts and to find solutions. And I think Quakers really bring a lot to the table with working with other groups. With our process of discernment, our faith of that, as Emily mentioned, you know, we're in this for the long term. We may not see immediate results, but can we possibly help develop a new framework for talking with each other about the impacts? And can we develop a new framework at looking for solutions? Because I think that's what's going to be important as we go forward. There are, as I just mentioned, there are a number of impacts that we're seeing all around us, and helping people to face the impacts in such a way that their grief, their fears do not overwhelm them. Even if they're in denial, helping them to say that no matter what you want to call it, this is what's happening. How can I accompany you? And I think that that's a lot of my work as I see it, that I've been doing both at the local level and to sort of theorize up my work with the Quaker United Nations office and with QEW sort of dovetails in that we've been convening a side event during the high-level political forum on sustainable development at the UN for the last 3 years. And we've been specifically talking about food security, food sovereignty, and water issues on a global level as it relates to people in the African diaspora. And our goal there is to think about what is happening, how these, what may be perceived as remote events in Africa, how they have impacts here in the States, in the Caribbean, and what that means for all of us. And we've, as I mentioned, we've been doing this for 3 years. We have partners globally in the African diaspora. We have partners beyond, where we bring together people in the side event to talk about, again, these local issues. So I presented on local issues in Florida, and we have a national and international discussion about the impacts and solutions. So over the next year, what I intend to do is convene another side event at the next summer in New York. And I continue to do this because it's sort of like what I've always been doing. I have a different way of looking at the world, and my my sense is that I kind of see this. It's all connected. It's not all. It's. I often tell people, tell me what you're passionate about, and let me figure out how I can partner with you. And that's been my. That's what keeps me going. I've made lots of connections this way, and would like to continue to do so. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much, Beverly. Really appreciate the work you're doing, and have been very interested in following, especially the work at the United Nations, and hearing all of what's going on with Florida with the particular impacts people have there. I'd like to introduce now Emma Condori Mamani, who comes to us from Bolivia and has been working on environmental concerns for quite a while now. And she will again respond to the questions, give you a short introduction about who she is, and describe to us what she's currently working on, describe why she was led to do this work, and what she hopes to see in the next year. Emma, welcome.
Hello, friends. My name is Emma Condori Mamani. I am here at the office of Friends International Bilingual Center, and there is another friend here with me who also works and helps here at this Friends Center. Well, I am very grateful to God. Here is Beatriz coming. Come here, Beatriz. So, Beatriz is another friend who has been helping and working hard with me here in Bolivia. So just I want to ask you, can you hear me well?
We can. I'm wondering if you can turn your camera because you're way off to the side.
Okay. Okay.
That's much better. Yes. Perfect. Thank you, Emma.
Okay. Thank you. Well, it has been for me a blessing, I could say, to be part of the wider Quaker community, and especially here in Bolivia. I grew up in a rural area. Most of my life I spent very connected with the nature. In the town where I used to live, for me it was very wonderful to enjoy and see the mountains and the rivers and the lake and the flowers. So I had a very wonderful childhood. However, in the last, maybe I could say 20 years in Bolivia, climate change has caused that our rivers and lakes dry up, you know, and as well as the big snow-capped mountains, they melted. And because of those reasons, here in Bolivia, families have been worried about the climate change. And especially one of our main concerns started maybe 10 or 15 years ago has been with the harvest, you know, has been, we didn't have enough water for our crops, and the rain was not really coming as we were expecting to come. So, but as the time passed, you know, the problem increased, and in 2016, here in Bolivia, in one of the main cities in Bolivia, actually we ran out of water, you know, of running water, you know, here in the city. It was suddenly, you know, like yesterday we had water and the next day we didn't have water, you know. So here, this city, La Paz, we usually we we are provided water by the artificial lake that is near the snow-capped mountains. So we have water coming from the mountains, and but because of the climate change, the snow was melting quickly, and the artificial lake was drying up, and that's we ended up with no running water here in the city La Paz. And when I am saying we didn't have water, was like there was no water in the bathroom, there was no water in the kitchen, there was no water for anything, or even for washing the clothes. And so at that time, it was really a tragedy here in the city, especially like, you know, families who have children, they were not anymore able to prepare the breakfast for their children. Senior people especially were affected. They were not able to bring water from other places, far places, you know. At that time, like when we had this problem, like the government tried to provide some water, like bringing water from different other parts of this country. However, it was not enough. So we suffered almost for a month with no water here in the city. And at that time, I was already somehow working here at the Friends Center. We have been working with children. We have been working with teenagers and young adult friends. And I didn't know why God was leading me to start this work with the Friends International Bilingual Center, and especially our work focused on younger friends. And when we had this incident in 2016, I understood why God was leading me. So that year, with the children and with the young friends, I mean, teenagers and young adult friends, instead of feeling sad about what was happening, you know, we started praying, and as well as we came up with some solutions. And it took a lot of process and a lot of discernment. Then we came up with a project. This project is called Biosand Water Filter Project. So, which was started by children workshops, and then it was run a workshop that we ran for young Bolivian people who can learn how to build the biosand filters. And so, and right now the project is under the care of young adult friends. So the project basically, you know, is to provide to the Bolivian families who are right now depending on water from wells and rivers. So we want to provide these biosand filters so they can have drinking water at home when we have dryouts or when we have flooding, including when we had last year and this year, especially a lot of flooding here in Bolivia. Still, there was no drinking water, you know. So because of that, right now, my focus, my work is currently supporting and working with this Biosand Water project, as I am helping somehow to the younger ones, to the children and young adult friends. So, and also something for me has been very important, has been this project here in Bolivia is, as you know, Bolivia has one of the largest Quaker communities. So it's very hard here to do a specific project regarding the climate change issues. So, but here at the Friends Center, we are a safe place where younger generation of Quakers from Bolivia could come and do something that would be very helpful and supportive to the society in Bolivia, not just be just say, I am a Quaker, I am a Christian, but really do something. So although the biosand filters are very hard work, we need to do like as a construction work, and also it's not very expensive, but talking about here in Bolivia, because we live in a developing country, this biosand filter is expensive. Each of these biosand filter costs $50. So, but I am very grateful to God that here the younger friends or Quakers are eager to do the work, the hard work, as well as to raise funds as they are able to build more biosand filters. So we have been doing different kind of fundraising, asking friends abroad, doing some other jobs here. And so we have been finding ways how we can continue running this biosand water filter project. I think for me, what I hope for to happen next year is really at least to have more than 100 families who can get these biosand filters, because we really need. Right now, we are more working in the state or department of La Paz, that is in the highlands in Bolivia, located in the highlands of Bolivia. But we even want to move this project to other states or departments of Bolivia, you know. And so, so right now we are in that process of learning, but at the same time working. And we are very grateful to God that God gives us strength, and I could say passion and love, and I could say also we have a lot of support. I could say here in Bolivia as well as abroad to carry this work on. So I just wanted to share that, and later if you have further questions, I would be happy to answer any question you may have. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Emma, for the work that you're doing and the hands-on role that the Quakers are playing to help supply clean drinking water to people. And I want to remind folks, if you have questions for any of the speakers, to please send them to Cherie Spock in the chat function, and she will collect those questions and we'll get to them after each of them have spoken. At this point, I want to introduce Kallan Benson, who I had the honor to meet a couple of weeks ago at the Quaker Earthcare Witness Steering Committee, and she's doing some absolutely amazing work with the rising youth, the global youth movement for climate. Kallan, please take it over for us. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Sorry, Zoom keeps asking me if I want to unmute myself every time you say my names. Yeah, so I'm a friend from Annapolis, Maryland, and I've been an activist for several years now. I started when I was 9 or 10, and I attribute that early start to a couple of things. One, my mother is a brain scientist, and I always learned about climate change and knew it was there and happening and man-made. But the other reason that I come back to a lot is that I went to a Quaker meeting where there was a bunch of crazy activists, and I was always seeing people going out on the streets, whether to the State House or down into DC to protest on so many issues. So it was kind of normal to me to find an issue that you really cared about and actually try to change the world in that particular area. I am currently working on Fridays for Future, which, if you don't know, Fridays for Future is about a year old. It started when a Swedish teenager, Greta Thunberg, started striking from school every day up until the Swedish parliamentary elections. And then she started striking every Friday. And pretty quickly after she started striking, people joined her, mostly in Europe. And then the US followed in last December, it was, when we started striking. At that point, we only had 6 strikers, I believe. Yeah, 6. And our movement has grown continuously, and it just continues to grow with more and more youth joining and advocating for action on climate change. Our last deep strike was actually, we called it a week for future because we had 2 dates, and then there were some actions in between, which was the 20th and 27th of September, had 7 million people worldwide. And to watch, I've had this pleasure of watching the US grow from 2 to 6 strikers, and then now we're here where we had over 1,000 actions on the 20th, and a strike in every state and Puerto Rico and DC, which was just amazing to watch. Beverly mentioned sunny day flooding, and one of having known about climate change from such an early age, I have this kind of filter where I can see the effects in my own community. We see sunny day flooding in Annapolis all the time, as well as increased precipitation, which adds to flooding. And we also see warmer winters. We had an interesting conversation one time in Annapolis with some older folks who had lived in the area for a long time, and then some younger folks in the room, and they were talking about ice skating on the river, and it's a tidal river, so it has to really freeze to be able to actually ice skate on it. And they were talking about ice skating on the river when they were young and getting ice skates every year for Christmas, and then skating all the way up to the mouth where Annapolis is. And I was sitting there thinking that I couldn't remember a time when the river had even frozen over. And having watched, and even in my lifetime, you can see so many changes. I believe it's 10 of, oh goodness, I can't remember. But there's a significant portion of the hottest years on record have happened in my lifetime. And we have watched our world change in such a short period of time. A while ago, I was on a panel with a bunch of youth activists, and a couple of them were recounting how their sisters and brothers and their younger family members had talked about they don't have any time to play with them anymore, or to go out and have fun with their family and kind of enjoy that time. And on the way home, my mom and my brother were speaking, and my brother was saying, I don't think it's a choice that Kallan's making to do this. She has to. And I do. It's not a choice whether or not we actually act on climate. We have to. There's no future for us if we don't work on this issue. And working in the youth climate movement and talking with all of my friends who are in the movement, I know that the movement it takes energy from a lot of hope and community, but it also takes energy from a lot of desperation and this feeling that there is no longer a choice. Looking to the next year, I hope, my greatest hope would be that we could stop burning fossil fuels and reverse the climate crisis, but knowing that that's probably not going to happen, especially with our current president. I do hope we can continue to see the movement grow and start to push our politicians even farther with our next deep strike on November 29th. And then the US will be focusing energy on Earth Day next year as well. And hopefully we as a group of climate activists can continue to push this further into the global psyche and continue to get it into these conversations. And hopefully going into the election year, people will talk about it more and realize that this is an issue that if you're running for office, you can't not address it. That's what I hope to see.
Thank you so much, Kallan. And I just want to point out the absolutely impressive range of actions and witness in the world that we've just heard from the four of these women, and just give you a bit of appreciation for all that you're doing. And to note that it takes all kinds of action and witness in the world to be part of a movement like this. I want to open this up to questions now, but really wanted to give a bit of time and appreciation from all of us for the work that you are doing in the world, all four of you. Thank you so much. Charisse, I'm wondering if you're ready to offer us the first of the questions.
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, it was great hearing from all of you four, so thank you so much for sharing. We have a few questions, and you're welcome to continue sending questions, and I'll put them together and make sure that that we all get to hear some answers to these questions. So I'll start with Emily. People were interested in hearing a little bit more about what carbon pricing looks like. So could you give us a little bit more details on maybe where we could find what FCNL is suggesting about that and how that would work?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a ton of resources on our website. The exact URL, it's fcnl.org/carbon pricing. And so I can put that in the chat box. But on that page, we have in-depth bill analysis of kind of each of the bills that I mentioned that are in Congress. We also have a really cool carbon pricing comparison chart that looks at all 7 bills, and you can easily see how they're different. And the basic premise of that policy design is for every kind of metric ton of carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas equivalent, you put a price. And so we suggest that that price is paid kind of by the point that the greenhouse gas is entering the market. So that could be at the mine or the natural gas plant, kind of the point of combustion. And then that price will gradually increase, or hopefully more than gradually, will rapidly increase each year to help shift the market towards cleaner sources of energy, not just fossil fuels. But then, so there's different policy designs about how high the price is and how quickly the price increases. But then there's a really big question around what to do with the revenue. And so this is kind of really where we've been delving in. On our website, that link I mentioned, you can see our carbon pricing principles, which are the questions that we use to evaluate our support for different policies. And right now, there are lots of different ways that the money collected from this policy could be used. There are proposals that suggest giving a check back to individual households. Policies suggest investing in infrastructure or low-income assistance or worker transition assistance. So there's all sorts of things that you can use the money for. So we're really engaged deeply on that question. And I'll put the link in the chat, but please, if anyone has specific questions, I'm happy to talk more about it.
Okay, and a follow-up question for that, which you addressed a little bit there, but a little bit more detail would be helpful. I know one of the critiques of carbon taxes has often been that it ends up taxing the poorest folks more than richer folks. So do you have ideas in place, or does FCNL have ideas in place for how to make sure that it doesn't disproportionately impact people who are lower income?
Yeah, that's one of our top concerns when looking at the policy. It's hard because you want to make the fuels more expensive so people stop using them, but for a lot of low-income families especially, they can't necessarily afford to buy the higher efficiency appliances or the electric vehicle cars. So it's a real important concern. I think there's more than one way to adequately, or to begin to think through how do you address that need. Some of the ideas that we've seen so far that are interesting to us, one is that when you give a check back to each household, you only give the money to low and middle income households. The wealthiest earners maybe wouldn't need to get a check to help offset the increased gas prices or the increased heating costs. Several of the bills that actually have bipartisan support invest a lot of the revenue into heating assistance for low income households or weatherization programs to help lower income houses become more energy efficient, so then have to spend less on their energy costs. Several of the bills direct money specifically towards the states for low income assistance. And so states can look and figure out what are the best ways to ensure that that money is going to the people that need it the most. So I love thinking about this question. I think it's hugely important, and the equity and justice lens of addressing climate change, whether through carbon pricing or other mechanisms, has to be central in our mind.
Yeah, thanks. And one more question about carbon pricing came in while you were sharing, and that was whether other governments are doing this sort of thing that that might be examples of, so that we could go look up how it's working in other places. So is that linked on FCNL's site anywhere, or do you have good suggestions of where we might look for that?
Yeah, there's a little bit about it on our website. I think various countries have different carbon pricing mechanisms. They might not look like the straight carbon tax that we're talking about in this situation. I know like the European Union has a price on carbon, and Canada has it. I think they're letting different provinces address it differently. So I can maybe send you as a follow-up some good resources that you could send out with the recording if that's helpful.
Great, thank you very much. I have some questions for Beverly. So Beverly, one of the questions was what are some of the greatest challenges that you're noticing as far as speaking about this topic among Quakers?
Good question. One of the challenges that I've run across is working with Quakers and dealing with grief around what is going on and feelings of despair. And I often remind people of something that Eileen Flanagan said to me at a workshop, in a workshop at Pendle Hill. And I say she said it to me because it struck me. There is no faith tradition that says be in despair. And so I think that is something that we as Quakers need to remind ourselves that we are used to being in the practice mode, in the activism mode, but sometimes that faith, that spiritual piece is missing, and that is something that we really need to reflect back on and dig deep in our history to sustain us in this work.
Yeah, thank you. And one other question for you is, do you have experience or tips? I'm sure you have plenty of experience, but do you have any tips for how to help Americans build empathy for others when climate change isn't directly impacting us yet? How do we help people build empathy in people that aren't yet seeing this themselves?
I'm going to go back to something that Emily said about common ground, and it's really people may not be aware of how they're being impacted, but the impacts are there. And so I actually began the discussion with what's going on in your community. How long have you lived here? What are you seeing? How do you, and what, talking to people about their childhoods and what they did, especially in my generation, people played outdoors. And what was that like for you? And why don't you do it now? And what's going on now? What about your grandchildren? What about your children? So those questions, and if I find empathy for others, that's building that bridge for them to find it, to extend it.
Thank you. Yeah, and Beverly, people were interested in learning more about times and places where you're leading workshops or that sort of thing. So if you could put in the chat maybe links to a website where people could see your upcoming events or ways that people could get in touch with you, then they would love to hear more about your work.
I would be happy to do that. As a matter of fact, SEYM held a virtual climate strike on the 27th of September. And Emily, thank you, Emily, and Kallan, we're looking forward for you, because one of the outcomes of that was that we want to have a strike once a quarter. And so we'll be having another virtual climate strike on the 29th, and that's during our half-yearly meeting. So we hope to have lots of people from our yearly meeting participating in that, and anyone else who wants to join us. So that information will go up very soon.
Great, thank you so much. Emma, we would love to hear a little bit more about what's the experience like for you when there's a water shortage. What do people do to get water, or what happens in the region when there's a shortage of water?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I think here in Bolivia, I think one of the hardest thing for Bolivian families is how to learn with water shortage right now. For instance, in my town, we only have maybe 3 times a week some water, running water. Then we have to learn like how to maybe have a storage of rainwater, or bring some water from somewhere else, or reuse the water that we are using, So those have been some maybe kind of the easiest way to cope with this problem with the water shortage. However, the problem here in Bolivia, it's terrible, I could say, because of the climate change. We are really, like the climate change, if last year we had, like, for instance, 2 long periods of, a very dry season. Even now this year we are facing like 80% of dry season, Because of that, even this year in August, our places, not just the Amazon, like Amazon in Bolivia, but other places just near our city where I am living right now, our forests or fields where we have grass, they were burned out, because it was too hot, and our animals had to die because there was no water, and families had to be like almost really like making miracles to get some drinking water, So, and the problem here in Bolivia, every year is increasing, every year it's getting worse, I could say, So because of that, especially the work we are doing, it's very important. One of the things we could say, the problem we have here right now in Bolivia, the the idea first, especially this project that we are working on, it's run by especially by women, young women, and I could say here in Bolivia, even among Quakers and non-Quakers, women working on a project is something for them not good to see that, but in spite of that, we have been really like continue spreading the word that inviting more young people who can be part of this project to build the biosand water filters, so we can allow more families can have some drinking water, so that is our main goal, and we are working very hard on that. At the same time, we are also really kind supporting in the way how other young people, they would like to also work here in Bolivia regarding the climate change, it's not just, for instance, here in Bolivia, most of the Quakers, because we are evangelical Quakers, most of the time we pray, but not do the action part, And so right now, what we have been promoting from Bolivia, it's that to promote Quaker youth action projects, So right now we are already working here in Bolivia, but we would like those kind Quaker youth action projects can be can be done in other parts of the world, because I'm sure there might be other places in the world where Quakers or people in general are facing this problem with the climate change.
Thank you so much. I want to note that it is now the time that some of you thought we were starting, which is 10 a.m. Pacific time and 1 p.m. Eastern, and I'm not sure, I think it's 6 p.m. London. So I want to welcome any of you who just joined us and let you know that we had some confusion about the timing. By the way, my name is Shelley Tannenbaum. I'm the General Secretary for Witness, and I am facilitating this program today, this webinar, and it will be recorded, and you will all receive a link of it with captions in about a month's time. It takes us some time to put the captions on. So I want to welcome you if you just joined us, and let you know that we have been going on for a bit, but we will continue for the next hour as long as anyone is able to stay with us. And I'm going to invite our presenters to give us maybe a very brief version of what they said at the beginning, which was an introduction, a little bit about why they're doing, what they're working on, and to maybe take this opportunity to follow up a bit with what they've already heard from each other and what they wish they would have said when they said this an hour ago. So you have an opportunity now to add something to what you said before. Maybe not as much time as you took before, but maybe 3 or 4 minutes for each of you. And I'd like to start with Kallan, because we haven't started questions with her yet, and give you, Kallan, a little bit more time if you'd like it. And we'll go through the 4 of you as an introduction to everyone who's just joined us, and then we'll go back to the questions. And for those of you who have just joined us, our format is that if you would like to ask a question of the presenter, to please send it in the chat function to Cherise Bach, and she's assembling all of your questions, and she'll be presenting them to the speakers. So thank you all, and again, I'm sorry for the confusion about timing. We're handling this the best we can, and you are all quite welcome, and thank you for joining us. Kallan, are you ready to do just a little sum up and letting us know what you wish you would have said, and now you have an opportunity to say it to everyone. Thank you for being here.
Sure. I am a friend from Annapolis, Maryland. And I'm a youth climate activist in the US. So I work right now on Fridays for Future, or the youth climate strikes that you may have seen. spearheaded by Greta Thunberg. Goodness, I try to be pretty brief. I'm working on this simply because we as youth feel that our future is at stake right now, and therefore we don't have a choice but to take action now. And as a person who can, I feel a certain sense of responsibility that I have the time, I have the ability to go out every week and to put all of my spare time into it, which gives me this extra sense of responsibility that I have to do it. I hope that this movement will continue to grow and at some point push us over the edge and actually get some concrete action here.
Thank you, Kallan. Emma, would you be willing to share with us just briefly why you're doing the work you're doing, and if you have any follow-up to what you've heard from the others that you'd like to share with the group?
My name is Emma Condori. I am from La Paz, Bolivia. I have been doing a lot of work with children and young adult friends here in Bolivia. I work with different yearly meetings here. I do all this work via the Friends International Bilingual Center. So, and I have been doing this work since 3 years ago, more like as a full-time volunteer, doing all this work, and something even myself I didn't understood. I could say somehow why God was leading me to do this work, especially like, you know, I know here in Bolivia there are very wonderful Quakers who can do much better work than me, but I think God has different plans, and he knew that I can be doing this work. So, and something very wonderful for me is like, I asked God in my prayers, and I said, like, if adult people doesn't want to hear, how is possible that young people are going to hear me, you know? So, but so far I found out that yes, young people can hear, you know, young people can hear, and yes, young people can work. Yes, young people can have faith. Yes, young people care about the future, especially they live out their Quaker testimony, talking about especially stewardship, Quaker testimony. So, and I think for me, so far, and not just actually for me, but other young people who are involved in this biosand water filter, we are just holding in our prayers this project, because we depend on God, and so we have been asking so far prayers from other friends abroad or here in Bolivia. They can support us in their prayers, but as well as we need, I could say, physical support, you know, and also we need support, like economic support here to continue doing this work, this project here in Bolivia. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Emma. And we will, just to remind everyone, we will be taking questions, so send those to Cherie Spock if you can, and let her know if they're for the full group or for which one of our presenters, and we'll be going back to questions very soon. Beverly, could you give us a sum up of what you're doing, why you're doing it, and any kind of follow-up you'd like to have after hearing from the other presenters? Thanks, Beverly.
Beverly Ward Southeastern yearly meeting, which includes Florida, Southern Georgia, and coastal South Carolina, Havana, and Managua. The worship groups and monthly meetings there. I am the field secretary for Earthcare. I've been field secretary for Earthcare for 3 years now. Thank you. And I work not only with the monthly meetings and worship groups in my yearly meeting, but with the wider Quaker world, and environmental groups and other groups who have secular groups that are like-minded. I am particularly concerned in working with on issues around water. We have unique water challenges in Southeastern yearly meeting, an abundance of bigger storms and flooding, including sunny day flooding that I'll go back to in just a minute. Florida's also sinking, and we have corporate interests that are buying off the water from our natural springs and our depleting aquifer. So all of these issues bring about issues around social justice, as we've discussed. This year, our yearly meeting, I did a workshop on climate gentrification, and considering that as people are displaced because of climate disruption, how will Quakers respond to this, and how can we help others find solutions? So that's what's consuming me right now. I also mentioned that we did a virtual climate strike on the 27th of last month, and we're looking forward, I'm planning with others in the yearly meeting to do another virtual climate strike on November 29th. And one of the things I didn't mention that someone brought back to mind is that in terms of actions, I've been taking part for the last 2 cycles in the climate change theater action. I'll put a link to that in the chat box. Essentially, playwrights from around the world are commissioned to do one-act plays that last from 6 to 10 minutes. To become a collaborator, you get access to these 50 plays, and they take place during the Conference of Partners, which we're in the middle of right now. The idea is to just read a play in your living room, or to get a group together and do this as an action, and to have people have the discussion about climate change on a local level. Today, I believe that all 50 states in the US and more than 30 countries around the world are now taking part in this. So the Conference of Partners began mid-September. It'll take place through December 21st, but that doesn't have to stop you. Once you become a collaborator, you have access to the plays, and you can do them year-round. So that's my big plug, and I will put this in the chat box and pass the baton.
All right. Thanks, Beverly. Emily, I hope you can sum up a bit what kind of work you're doing and why, and if you have any follow-up reflections after hearing from the other presenters.
Yes. So my name is Emily, and I'm with the Friends Committee on National Legislation. We are the nonpartisan Quaker lobby, and our primary goal is to bring the values of Friends to members of Congress and to actually get them to pass legislation that reflects Quaker values. So we seek to find that of God, or our common ground and shared values, with every single legislator. And our primary goal for over 6 years now has been to build up bipartisan support for action on climate change in Congress, recognizing that if we don't have members from both parties willing to engage in the conversation about solutions, we will never get legislation passed out of US Congress. So the good news is that we've seen a lot of progress in the 6 years that I've been here. The issue feels way less polarizing, and you have Republicans and Democrats talking about climate change. There are hearings every week. There's a lot longer to go still. We can now debate whether the solutions being put forward from both parties are enough or are fair and equitable, but it's such a huge difference, which is really exciting. And I think the one thing that maybe I didn't fully mention, and that I've been thinking about hearing all of the stories that other presenters on this call have shared, is the power of sharing those stories with elected officials. And so, you know, a lot of people have talked about why they care about climate change and how they've seen it impacting their community and their lives in very real and concrete ways. And those stories need to be shared with community members and friends and members of the media, but also with those in power, those with political power. And so for me, one of the cool things that FCNL does is that we teach people how to help share those stories in an effective way with their legislators in a way that can enact change. And so I'm encouraging people to think about lobbying and advocacy as just one of many tools that you can use to share those stories of your local climate impacts, and then why you want Congress to take structural action. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, and thanks again to all of you. I want to note that one of the values of these webinars that we are putting on is to both identify common ground amongst all the work that we are doing, but also to recognize the wide range of actions and witness in the world that each of us Quakers are participating in. I mean, no one of us can do all of it, but together we are presenting an amazing range of ways that people can get involved and show folks how to do that. So my phone ringing. Anyway, I'm going to put myself on mute and go back to Charisse, who has some questions.
Great. I have a couple more questions for Emma. So Emma, people were curious about if you're working with an organization to do the biosand water filters, and if there are ways that we can support you either financially or other ways that we can support that work that you're doing. So questions about kind of the overall, like what organization are you working with? Are you doing this on your own? And how can we help?
We have a website. The Friends International Bilingual Center has a website. So we have a section that says projects. So within that project, we have two wonderful projects. One is this biosand water filters project. And also we have a Quaker Youth Action Project. We work with first day schools at the international level. There we have more information about how we can support this project. We really, for instance, as I mentioned, each biosand filter costs $50. So sometimes we need money to buy a bag of cement that it's almost like $10. So it's not just they can donate like $50. They can donate for a bag of cement. For instance, friends, if they would like to donate some money. And also we invite monthly meetings or quarterly meetings if they can include us in their budget as we are working with this project. This biosand water project, it's a short-term project because of the need we have here in Bolivia. So when we started planning this project, we were not planning to have this project done in the next 10 years, but do this project now, you know. And that happened for us. Even sometimes, especially our young adult friends work from 9 to almost 5 p.m. they work. Sometimes we only have some money to provide some lunch for them, you know. It would be very wonderful even if we can, you know, give some stipend to them, like for the transportation, so they come to the workshop place, you know. And yes, there is one organization who specifically supported us with this project, especially at the more academic level, I could say. Friendly Water for the World, that was the organization who sent 2 facilitators or trainers last year here to Bolivia. So those facilitators worked with 20 young adult friends, so they learned how to build the biosand filters. So with this group of young adults right now, we are continuing working on building the biosand filters.
Yeah, great, thank you. Yeah, I've heard of the biosand water filter group, Friendly Water for the World, so that's good that they're involved in helping you out. And can you put the link to your website that you were talking about in the chat so that we can all go check that out and see how to support your work?
Okay, I will do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, let's see. Find my list of questions here. Kallan, people are interested in a little bit more information about your Fridays for Future work. And so some people want some more information about just kind of what these are. And others are inspired by Greta Thunberg and all of the activism that's been going on, and wondering if you got a chance to meet her when she was in your neck of the woods, and what about her work is particularly inspiring you. So maybe give a little bit of background about what Fridays for Future is for folks who maybe haven't heard about it or haven't been as connected into that, and then what about Greta is particularly inspiring to you.
Sure. So Fridays for Future is a youth movement. It was started by this Swedish teenager, Greta Thunberg. She began striking last August, and she struck every day up until the Swedish parliamentary elections, and then she started striking from school every Friday. And that's where the name comes from, Fridays for Future. People actually joined her pretty quickly, first in Sweden and then kind of expanding to Europe. And it expanded very organically, I would say. With friends, it started friends and family connections. It spread to Australia relatively quickly because one of the people who started striking with her in Sweden has family in Australia, and then they had connections in Canada, so it spread to Canada, and I know the Canadian people, so we started in the US. And the movement, we are a movement, not a NGO or an organization, which means we're very organic and we're much more of a community. We're non-hierarchical and we're grassroots. I did get the chance to meet Greta when she was in Washington, D.C. And then I actually did get the chance to go up to New York for the UN. What's inspiring, I think why Greta resonates with so many youth is because she is different. She has Asperger's, which means she thinks in a very black and white way. And when she speaks, she's really telling it like it is. There's no hyperbole or fancy wordsmithing in there. It's just saying where we are right now and what needs to be done. And the cold, hard truth that we don't have much time anymore. And that has resonated with a lot of kids who have felt that way for a long time, but didn't necessarily have the courage or ability to speak that way. And it's also created this really wonderful contingent of kids in our movement, making it a really neurodiverse movement with kids who have dyslexia and Asperger's or are on the spectrum, with all these different brains and minds working in different ways but cohesive. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really inspiring and great to hear a little bit more about the history of how you got involved in that sort of thing. So thank you. Some people want to know about how well you feel like the Fridays for Future movement is working, and is it working in groups outside of Quakerism, and how is it working among friends, in your opinion? So can you give us a little sense of how you feel about the movement at the moment and its effectiveness?
Yeah, I think the movement is doing really well right now. We're only a year old, and we've grown very quickly. Now that does mean that we've hit some bumps along the road. You see other movements that have spent years building a structure and then they took off. And we kind of have this opposite where we took off and now we have to build a structure, which is an interesting way of going about things and certainly provides some fun conversations amongst people from all around the world at all times of day. And my dad has teased me that I couldn't make friends with all the kids who were up at midnight here because then I was asleep. So I made friends with all the people who were up at midnight on the other side of the world and I was awake. But one thing, the climate movement in general, but then also the Fridays for Future movement is built on relationships with people. And that makes things messy and you get into these kind of interesting webs of connections where people like that person and don't like this person, and they've got all these stories from where they've met. But it also makes the movement really strong because you've got these really close connections and close bonds from people not only in your community, but all over the world. As far as the Quaker side of it, I would say within the movement, you see Quaker adults are more visible, just because with any religion, by the time you're an adult, you feel more stable and more connected in your religion. But when you look at kind of the people that are really active, there's certainly a Quaker contingent, and then we also have Unitarians and Indigenous, as well as all different other sectors, but you certainly see a lot of Unitarians and at least a decent contingent of Quakers. Maybe it's just because I'm one that I seem to bump into more, but and as we're continuing to grow, we're trying to work with more and more people. I come from Annapolis Friends Meeting, which is very supportive of me and always trying to help out. But then I also got to go talk to Quaker Earthcare Witness and forge these connections with other Quakers and see how they can fit into the movement.
Great, thank you. And one more question for you, Kallan, is how you feel that adults can be involved in the Fridays for Future. Like, what is a respectful and supportive way to do that? And when is the next deep strike? In which case you probably should define what a deep strike is for us.
Absolutely. So we have different levels of actions. We obviously have these weekly actions where kids go out every Friday. But then we also have these days that sometimes we call them deep strikes, or you'll also hear global strike or different terms. They're basically a date where at least a few countries have decided to put a lot of energy in them. It's pretty much impossible to find one date that works for the entire world. If you know how to do that, please tell me, because it is an interesting process. But at least a sector of the world will be putting a lot of energy into that date, and trying to make more larger traditional protests and actions that are more likely to get into the press and see a lot of people out there. Our next one is November 29th. But make sure to look where you are, because there are some people that will be striking on the 6th of December. The biggest, I mean, obviously, adults are welcome to come out to our strikes. Please do. There is no age limit. You can come out every week or come out on the deep strikes, and then supporting in whatever way you can, doing actions on Friday, whether that means posting on social media or just even having a conversation with the person sitting next to you about climate change. Do something. But the other kind of big things you can do is, obviously, we as youth feel like we kind of have to take these actions because we don't have much of a voice in the system otherwise. So adults, certainly, getting involved in your local government as much as you can, as well as voting. Please vote, even in the primaries. And then you also can open a lot of doors for us, bringing us into other schools and places like here or QEW, and letting us talk about the movement and how other people can get involved means a lot and just helps us spread our message. And then if you have, I mean, coming to the movement and saying, I've got these skills, is there any way I can help out, is wonderful. To clarify, please don't come and say, hey, this is what I want to do, because that isn't very helpful. But if you say, hey, I've got this particular set of skill set, and if I could help out anywhere, that's lovely. So really, I mean, and going up to your local strikers, where we're all over the place, even if you don't notice us, ask, see if you can help, see if you can come out at least a couple days.
Thanks very much. I'm going to go back around to each of the presenters and ask one more question that has come up since we kind of talked to you last. So for Emily, some people are interested in hearing a little bit more about whether your FCNL's work has shifted focus from more of a legislative bipartisan focus to more of like civic engagement with people at more of a local level because of the administration's current unwillingness to really work on this stuff and pass through legislation, or are you kind of still going in that same direction and building legislative work and waiting for, having it prepared for when there might be a little more movement? So has this administration shifted your approach, or is it kind of still going in the same direction?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the administration has definitely changed how we do our work in a lot of ways. We now have to react to a lot of things. So before we were you build a proactive strategy with the legislation that you want to see passed. And now we're continuing to do that, but we also have to respond. So every time the administration has tried to roll back a regulation on the environment, it's constant. And so we're constantly responding to that, but we really don't want to get lost in just being reactionary. And so it's figuring out what are the important things to react and respond to, but how do we not let that distract us from our goal, which is still to build up political will to see more comprehensive climate legislation pass Congress. I think there are a lot of environmental organizations that I know have tried to pivot more to the state and local work, just in what they perceive as an absence of federal action. And I think that work is really important. But FCNL's really focused on federal advocacy. And so we like to say that the skill sets you can learn from us about lobbying or writing letters to the editor or op-eds, those can be used at the local and state level as well, but we're continuing to focus on building up support for federal action.
Well, thanks. Appreciate your sharing. And we did also have a question about the Clean Energy Victory Bonds bill that got introduced in July. So I don't know if you have any updated information about that. Maybe if you have a link to anything that FCNL is doing to help with that, you could share that with us in the chat, and people can look up the Clean Energy Victory Bonds bill to see more about what it is. But if you have specifics about that, maybe share that with us in the chat. So thank you. Beverly, I have a question for you that you kind of alluded to a little bit, but I know that a lot of the work that has to do with environmental justice has to do with environmental racism and people of color that are disproportionately impacted by climate change and environmental toxins and that sort of thing. So I assume you're working on that, and so we're wondering a little bit more about that sort of work and how Quakers are responding to that aspect of climate change and environmental problems.
Oh, thank you for that question. I will go back to something that Emily said around carbon pricing. Part of what we're considering with this is a number of the impacts that low-income and minority communities are experiencing have to do with structural racism. That people are, low-income communities and minority communities are usually situated in areas that have environmental issues already. And these were historically have not been addressed. A favorite example of mine comes from New Orleans, and when sewer lines were provided. The rich were able to afford to pay for their own sewer lines, and it was not a public option. And so you get these conditions that are exacerbated by climate disruption. And so one of the things we can think about when we're looking at carbon pricing is using some of those funds to address these structural issues, so that people don't have to make these immediate choices about, you know, do I invest in a new appliance that's more electronically efficient, but I still have this issue of flooding. So those are things that we need to be talking about on a broader level, legislative, which is like why I partner with FCNL, so that we can begin to talk about these, you know, what created these conditions. And someone else asked a question about what are other countries are doing. Well, we can look to the Netherlands or what they're doing around low-income, low-lying areas that continually flood. Are low-income people living in these areas? Can we move whole communities and make them whole in areas that have higher ground? So these are things that that we can look to other places, and we can also look to ourselves at where we're making investments. Are we investing in pumps to pump the water? Where? But are we investing in housing so people don't have to live in areas that flood? So those are the kinds of things that I take the local issues and try to theorize them up to these national and global policy questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that, and that's kind of inspiring to me to think of it as what's this local issue and what does that look like if we take it bigger. So I appreciate that. And Emma, we would love to hear more about how these projects go with the youth in your area. It sounds like you put together times where youth come together to work on these biosand water filters. So can you explain how you organize that? What happens on those days? That sort of thing. What does it look like to get youth together to create these water filters?
here in the city of La Paz, for instance, I am part of a yearly meeting called Holiness Friends Yearly Meeting. I do some work there as a pastor. I think that gives me some opportunity always to be maybe.
Emma,
Yes.
if you could hold off just a minute, we seem to have some sound problems with you, and you're coming through in a very odd way. I don't know which end it's at. I'm wondering if Faith has some sense of. To go ahead and try again and see how that is. What's going on with the sound?
Okay, I will try again. I was saying that I help out as a pastor as well in my yearly meeting. That's called.
I think we're really not hearing you, and there's a huge amount of buzz. So why don't we try to fix it on our end if we can, and come back to you and go on to the next question. See if if technologically we can figure out what's going on, and come back to you with that question in a minute or two. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry about that. We can kind of hear you, but it's hard to understand. So we'll come back to you, and hopefully it will work. Let's see, Kallan, one more question for you. Where did it go? So can you describe the last strike that you did during the last legislative session, and some plans, what plans you have in the works for the next one?
Yes, I did forget about this. Hard to forget about, but it happens. So for the last, I live in Maryland, and we have these crazy legislative sessions where they're only 90 days long. So if you want to get a bill passed, you have to get it passed in those 90 days, which is kind of this insane rush of energy and people running around and planning protests. And it's a busy couple of months. And it's created this kind of weird status quo where a bill kind of has to go through the session maybe 3 or 4 times before it's allowed to get passed, kind of. Not that it's guaranteed to get passed, but it has to go through. It's a weird system. So I started striking every Friday last December. And after striking a couple of times, I kind of went insane. And I went to my parents and I told them, hey, what if I went silent for the legislative session? And you know, I kind of thought they would be like, what did you just say? you want to do what? As you can tell, I'm always such a quiet person, so that is not something you would expect. But instead they were like, okay, well, that's an interesting idea. Let's talk about it a little more. So we did. And I decided I really wanted to work on this bill called the Maryland Healthy Green Amendment, which is a pretty simple bill. It simply states that all Marylanders are granted the right to a healthy and healthful environment. That would go into the Bill of Rights of the Maryland Constitution. And I sat outside the State House every day, well, Tuesdays through Fridays, because that's when they're in session, and I didn't speak. Certainly an interesting experience. I actually kind of miss it sometimes. And you know, definitely got some teasing from my favorite legislators. But it was an experience that I look back on and kind of think of all I've learned, especially when it comes to when you're not talking, you're not really thinking about what you have to say next, or what's going on in your head. You're more of just focused on what other people are saying and what's going on around you. So you're really taking in everything that's going on. And it also let me bring my activism into spaces that I haven't been able to bring it. I play the cello, so I'm in a youth orchestra, and, you know, showing up and explaining to a bunch of teenagers, hey, I'm not going to talk for the next 3 months. That's an interesting experience. If you do this, remember to tell your friends the week before, so that they're actually give a little bit of warning before you show up and suddenly can't speak. And, you know, it took a couple weeks for everyone to realize that, no, my voice isn't gone. I'm taking a conscious choice to not speak, and because of this, and had some interesting conversations with kids who went, one of the most memorable being, we have a state legislator? Wait, Annapolis is the capital of Maryland? What is this magic? And kind of explaining on a whiteboard the legislative process and how the state legislator works. I have not decided what I'm going to do for this session. Part of me wants to go silent again, but the other part of me knows that I also have to be on a lot of conference calls all week, and that provides some interesting challenges. And I don't really, it's being a youth activist right now, it's kind of hard to plan even for the next week, let alone the next couple of months. So it's hard to know even where we'll be next January, whether we'll be finally pushing us over the edge and getting some action, or whether we'll be really ramping up and continuing to grow and work on the next deep strike. So we'll see.
Yeah, that sounds like a fairly Quakerly type of strike to do, to be silent. That's pretty fun. So were you silent the entire legislative session, or just while the legislators were meeting?
I was silent the entire legislative session. So that was certainly interesting. Yeah. And my plan was to stay silent either the entire legislative session or until the bill was passed, which it was only its second year in the session, so it did not pass. Plus, we have an interesting environment committee. Some of the members are very lovely. Yeah. Some of them are not. Yeah.
So yeah, it sounds like you kind of had more of a chance to educate other youth by being silent. So you were describing the legislature on a whiteboard, not speaking, just drawing out the structure. So you're kind of educating youth as well as drawing awareness to the legislators. And so what was that like, of recognizing that the youth had maybe not quite as much awareness as you would hope?
It was certainly interesting. I mean, the most memorable ones were the people who really had no clue what you were talking about. And you're kind of like, how do you go through a high school government class and not know this? But I mean, and also kind of the level of education, especially when you get kind of so into this little bubble of activists that you forget that people don't know what COP is, or even what district they're in. So you kind of bringing it out into this other group of people that were my friends who I knew, but hadn't really talked about this before. Certainly brought up some interesting questions, especially I knew a couple of kids who were in AP government classes and they still didn't really know about the committee structure, or that it had to go, that we needed a bill sponsor on both sides, and that then it had to be reconciled in another committee that's separate. So it was certainly rather interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much. Emma, should we test your audio again and see if we can hear you better this time? Looks like you're back, but maybe using a different device. Let's see. Oh, there she is.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Can hear you, but it still sounds all garbled. So maybe we can get some of your story off of the this webinar, and we can share that with people separately about the story of the youth and how you what those gatherings look like for when you bring youth together to work on the biosand filters. So sorry the audio is not working. It's pretty hard to understand you. So. We'll hope to get your story another way.
Well, I'm extremely pleased we had the time with you as we did, Emma, and sorry this part isn't going to work with follow-up questions, but thank you so much to all four of you for joining us and for participating in the slightly confusing time zone issues that we've been having. But I do want to remind everyone who's on the call that we will be distributing a video of the call that will include some closed captioning, and we'll send that out to everybody who signed up for the call, so you'll receive that link. And if you have further questions for the participants, we'll be happy to share them with them. And thank you again for joining us. Thanks so much to Friends World Committee for consultation for setting up this kind of call, this kind of webinar. We don't have a date set yet for our next one, but we will make sure to let everyone know when that will be. It will be a couple months from now. And if you're on the FWCC or the Quaker Earthcare Witness distribution list, you'll be receiving notices about these webinars. So if you're not already on those lists, please make sure you are to learn when the next one will be. And we're inviting those of you on the call to suggest to us people you think would be wonderful to have on a webinar like this. So thank you so much to everyone for being here, and appreciate sharing the time with you.